do not say anything that incites violence or is inflammatory out of the ordinary, because this regime is looking for an excuse to crush you beneath its boot. And so that is an unwise thing for her to do. However, considering we had Daily Mail reporting about 2 weeks ago that a 14-year-old boy was stabbed to death, and one of his killers got, 8 years? Another of his killers got his sentence downgraded to manslaughter, got given 2 years, but under Labour's plans to act like Bane from The Dark Knight Rises and free the prisons of all of their psychos, he's now being let out after 6 months. Bearing in mind, some of these people that have put up social media posts and been arrested for inaccurately sharing the identity of the stabber not being the second generation Rwandan immigrant, but some Muslim asylum seeker, which was wrong. Some of those people are looking at charges that are far longer even than that. So you can be party for murdering a teenager and get a shorter sentence and be out on the street. But if you put something naughty on social media, you will be locked up. This is insane.
If one of the regime's accredited victim groups commits a crime, the approach will be plodding, pervasive, and as pathetic as the law can be diluted to allow. Whereas if one of the same victim groups claims to sanctity is felt to be threatened by a certified oppressor, the approach will be swift, despotic, and as severe as the law can be stretched to authorize. And this is what happens organically when you have an endemic culture in the police force, as in every institution. And it's also what happens, it's also an inseparable byproduct of our experiment with diversity and multiculturalism, because we simply do have in this country now sort of indigestible foreign diasporas who do not consent to be policed anything like as readily as the host population does.
This is Julie Sweeney, a 53-year-old from Kidsgrove who has lived a quiet, sheltered life in Cheshire and is the primary caregiver to her ill husband. After the Southport massacre, she posted a highly inappropriate message to a community group on Facebook with 5,100 members about blowing up a mosque. She deleted the post. She said she had no intention to put people in fear, certainly no intention to actually do anything. In fact, she has now said she will delete her social media accounts altogether. Her lawyer said she accepts it was stupid and added it was a single comment on a single day, and that this woman, Julie, has not troubled the courts in her long life. But Judge Stephen Everett, the recorder of Chester following Two Tier Keir's establishment narrative to destroy white working class folks' lives if they were involved in the unrest in any way, well, he wasn't having any of it. He told her, "You should have been looking at the news media with horror, like every right-minded person. Instead, you chose to take part in stirring up hatred. So-called keyboard warriors like you must learn to take responsibility for your disgusting and inflammatory language." And with that, Julie Sweeney was locked up for 15 months in prison. Her husband won't be cared for, even though this is a woman who so clearly poses no threat to public safety. This is not justice, it's vengeance. And it's a warning to all of us. Do not step out of line or we'll bang you up. Meanwhile, look at this headline from the Daily Telegraph. Career criminals walk free in soft justice scandal. Offenders with more than 100 convictions get slap on wrist instead of jail time. But don't worry about the violence. Facebook and X is where the real crime is taking place, apparently. This is all completely mad. A 15-year-old schoolboy is now facing 10 years in jail after the charges against him, which related to the unrest in Sunderland on August the 2nd, were strengthened to riot. A Glasgow man, who actually I've always found to be a very good person to follow on X, is facing charges too. Now, according to the BBC, Nottingham Magistrates Court heard the posts were alleged to contain anti-Muslim and anti-establishment rhetoric. What the hell? So being anti-establishment online can now be considered a criminal offence. Well, in that case, you might as well just lock me up right now. Starmer is turning the UK into a police state, something like North Korea. We've already seen David Spring, a retired 61-year-old former train driver from Sutton, and Sellafield worker Lee Joseph Dunn become victims of Two Tier Keir's woke Stasi. This is all so over the top. Lucy Connolly, the wife of a Conservative politician, is behind bars on remand because of her social media post, an indignity usually reserved for violent criminals. But the fight back has begun against this madness, so clearly designed to stop the neglected white working classes expressing their very understandable fears about mass immigration. And it's the brilliant Douglas Murray leading the charge.
As you say, the person who does not have the platform that I have or the means that Elon Musk has. What about them when, as is happening all the time at the moment in the UK, police forces that have not solved one burglary, yes, you heard that right, not one burglary in recent years, are knocking on people's doors and arresting them for Facebook posts, for retweeting things. Sure, there are some people who've said some horrible things and disgraceful things in recent weeks, but oh my, the priorities of the British police. They are really treading into very, very dangerous Orwellian waters. It turns out, and the rest of the public in Britain can't trust them to solve a burglary. Would I trust them to police my speech? No, I don't think so. As you
Hell no. And there are other heroes being brave enough to speak up too. Toby Young's absolutely essential free speech union has declared Sir Keir Starmer's strong-arming the authorities to prosecute people for imprudent social media posts will have a chilling effect on free speech. At the Free Speech Union, we're fighting back. The Conservative Woman's Cathy Ginjal, she declared 10 years for rioting is not enough. Sentences should be longer, judges say. This is not even two-tier justice. It is not justice at all, but revenge and sheer vindictiveness. And the academic Philip Kizali made this very important point. Will they be jailing the thugs who call for intifada on a weekly basis? And what about those who chant from the river to the sea? Should be space enough for a good few 100,000 Jew haters now they're emptying the prisons. Somehow, I think it's 53-year-old carers, lone and female, who take priority. It's the only time they're top of the list for anything. I'm ashamed of my country. And I hate to say it, but with this sort of two-tier justice now being celebrated by the establishment and the MSM, I am too. Time now for today's Superstar panel. And today I'm delighted to be joined by the co-hosts of the New Culture Forum's brilliant Deprogrammed. I was delighted to appear on their programme, I think it was last week or the week before, but check that out after the show on the New Culture Forum. It's Connor Tomlinson, who is also host of Tomlinson Talks on Lotus Eaters, and making his Outspoken debut, Harrison Pitt, senior editor at the European Conservative and a fellow at the New Culture Forum. Great to have you both here. So, Connor, what do you make of Julie being locked up for 15 months for an imprudent, yes, and a very inappropriate post on Facebook when we see violent criminals being released?
Well, I want to reiterate at the start of your show, Dan, it's good to see you again. This is why Harrison, all of my colleagues over at Lotus Eaters have always said, do not do anything stupid in regard to these riots or even the protests. Don't start a fight with police. Don't go and burn down a migrant hotel or loot a Greggs or a Lush. Those are all criminal behaviors, criminal damage, violence. Terrible, don't condone it. But also, even if you are grieving over the poor girls that were murdered in Southport, even if you are frustrated by the privileging of Islam by the financial and legal sector over the native British population, and even some of its grateful house guests like the Jewish community in this country, even if you are enraged by all of those things, do not say anything that incites violence or is inflammatory out of the ordinary, because this regime is looking for an excuse to crush you beneath its boot. And so that is an unwise thing for her to do. However, considering we had Daily Mail reporting about 2 weeks ago that a 14-year-old boy was stabbed to death, and one of his killers got, 8 years? Another of his killers got his sentence downgraded to manslaughter, got given 2 years, but under Labour's plans to act like Bane from The Dark Knight Rises and free the prisons of all of their psychos, he's now being let out after 6 months. Bearing in mind, some of these people that have put up social media posts and been arrested for inaccurately sharing the identity of the stabber not being the second generation Rwandan immigrant, but some Muslim asylum seeker, which was wrong. Some of those people are looking at charges that are far longer even than that. So you can be party for murdering a teenager and get a shorter sentence and be out on the street. But if you put something naughty on social media, you will be locked up. This is insane.
It is insane. And the thing is, Harrison, look, no one is excusing any violence or anyone who is inciting violence. It's not actually about that, though, because lots of these social media posts, I've seen them. They are political opinions. Yes, maybe expressed inartfully in the heat of the moment. But if we're a country that locks people up for this, I think, number one, that is chilling, that is terrifying, it's really worrying. But we know, Harrison, that all of the folk who were inciting violence on the Jewish population after October 7th for weeks and weeks and weeks were not locked up, were not charged. They weren't even condemned.
There have also, thank you as well for having me on your show, Dan. It's a privilege to be here. There have also been numerous cases of people from, let's say, accredited victim groups who have made truly bilious comments about not only Jews, but also the white host population online. In 2015, there was a woman by the name of Bahar Mustafa who posted on her social media account, "Kill all white men," which I would argue is a much more direct incitement to violence than many of the examples which we've seen play out on our social media. And in fact, she had her charges summarily dropped by the Metropolitan Police. And this woman, of course, belongs to what under our woke moral order gets classed as a sort of accredited victim group. Whereas the kinds of people that you're wheeling out as examples, I forget the names of the individuals involved, but people who are saying things like "who the F is Allah," people engaging in rage rhetoric on Facebook, people who are understandably and in many cases hot-headedly and deplorably furious, or rather their reaction is deplorable about what's been going on in our country, the elite betrayal we've seen over the last 30 years. These people belong to a different category. And I would argue that this is inseparable from our descent into a woke moral order. And this enforces all of our, this woke moral order has captured all of our institutions at the moment. And the useful thing as well is that you don't need to be a conspiracy theorist to sign up to any of this. There doesn't have to be a sort of single guiding intelligence. There doesn't have to be a cabal that's pushing for two-tier policing as such. All you need is an endemic culture in the police force. And that's one we've had since the Macpherson report. There has been the police have been trying to prove their anti-racist bona fides. And particularly since the George Floyd riots as well, that was ratcheted up. And so what you have is a situation at the moment where if one of the regime's accredited victim groups commits a crime, the approach will be plodding, pervasive, and as pathetic as the law can be diluted to allow. Whereas if one of the same victim groups claims to sanctity is felt to be threatened by a certified oppressor, the approach will be swift, despotic, and as severe as the law can be stretched to authorize. And this is what happens organically when you have an endemic culture in the police force, as in every institution. And it's also what happens, it's also an inseparable byproduct of our experiment with diversity and multiculturalism, because we simply do have in this country now sort of indigestible foreign diasporas who do not consent to be policed anything like as readily as the host population does. And I think there's one sense in which the police's overzealous and the justice system's overzealous reaction to the enraged response to the murder of 3 girls in Southport can be classed as an attempt to finger wag at the host population and say, you're not going to get away with these tactics as readily as certain other groups do.
Indeed. But the thing is, Connor, I'm speaking to lots of folk who are intelligent, who are maybe high profile or political or journalists, and they're looking at all of this and starting to worry about being arrested. So it is having the impact that Starmer wants it to have.
Well, there's absolutely a chilling effect. I mean, Harrison and I both have friends and colleagues who have been texting us saying, can you ensure that this tweet is okay for us to send out, lads? Because you've usually got cooler heads than most other people in the sphere. And even though they have no reason under a fair and just system of the law to fear being cracked down on for doing good and proper citizen journalism, they're terrified to just do their job. And the reason is, we all know that there is a two-tier application of the law in this country that cuts in favor of both the approved victim identity groups that Harrison has said, but also in favor of various NGOs and MPs and members of the establishment. Jess Phillips, our favourite MP over at the Lotus Eaters, decided to run cover for armed Muslim mobs intimidating a female Sky News journalist and say that Richard Tice was spreading fake news when, frankly, Richard admirably was calling this out. And she gets away with just saying, oh, sorry, I shouldn't have done that, and I'll take a break from Twitter for a while because everyone else is giving me a pile on. So Jess Phillips in this scenario is now the victim.
And she didn't even say sorry, by the way. I looked at her comments really closely today. She didn't say sorry. She said, oh, it was a bit of a mistake. I wish I'd phrased it differently. But there's none of that sympathy given to the folk who maybe were inartful in their tweets on the day of the massacre itself, when emotions were running incredibly high. So you're right. It's yet another example of a two-tier society. Likewise, Nick Lowles from the ironically named charity Hope Not Hate. Absolutely no repercussions for him, Harrison, even though his spreading of misinformation, which was actually about Muslim women being attacked with acid, actually provably did cause violence and unrest on the streets. So we know that there's two-tier even when it comes to this particular moment in time.
It is crucial to point out that just as no one person or no one group has a monopoly on truth, so too no one person or no one group has a monopoly indeed on misinformation. And we've seen countless examples in legacy media and elsewhere of more approved groups, whether NGOs or whether approved individuals who are courtiers of the regime rather than heroic and sometimes less heroic dissenters against the regime. Nick Lowles is just one example, spreading that incendiary rumor about a Muslim woman being acid attacked. I mean, that should surely qualify. Not under the standards that I would like to see enforced, but under the standards which clearly are enforced for certain other groups and for certain other individuals, that clearly should qualify as a potential incitement to. Well, it's a sort of an invitation to a very to a community which is very tribal to act in certain ways, particularly when we were seeing all sorts of videos on social media, crucially not in the mainstream media, lots of videos in social media of white people being effectively singled out by marauding Muslim gangs. We saw that in Birmingham. We saw that elsewhere as well. But you've also got, journalists denying the lab leak theory in the New York Times, and you've got the hands up, don't shoot slogan that incited BLM. And I think there have even been some very diligent studies demonstrating that, particularly in the United States, demonstrating that depending on how respondents identify politically, something like very liberal, independent, conservative, very conservative, and then you ask these people from these different cohorts how many unarmed black men get killed by police every year. It's people who are most addicted to legacy media, people in the very liberal groups and the liberal groups who massively overestimate the number of black men who actually find themselves in this situation yearly, get some of them guessing up to 10,000, some of them guessing up to 1,000, when the actual number is more around 30 or 35. And it's actually the conservatives, the people who are sort of terminally online, who are much more clued in. And that's only going to be even more the case now that Elon Musk has taken control over Twitter and has brought in what I think is a very salutary community notes function, which enables things to be corrected, not in a top-down fashion, but in a kind of organic, deregulated fashion in real time by people who correct things. And this, we've seen this touch both sort of right-wing examples of misinformation and left-wing examples of misinformation. The second point, and the final point I would want to make as well, is that even the people who are picked on by our legacy media for having incited these riots. So, for example, Tommy Robinson's name crops up a lot. Tommy Robinson would not exist, quite apart from what you think of him, and I happen to think that he doesn't get a very fair shake at times, although in other respects I think he's often his own worst enemy. He would not exist without the decades-long treachery of our elites. And a crucial question which I like to ask to prove this point is, where is the Hungarian Tommy Robinson? He doesn't exist. It's because the Hungarian elites have done a good job at honoring their people's wishes ever since their liberation from communism in 1991. Our elite has done a bad job, and so it saddles itself with these secondary problems of people who, frankly, probably shouldn't be in politics. Tommy Robinson should be an anonymous Luton fan. None of us should ever have heard of him. It's only because of people like Alistair Campbell, people like Blair, and I'm sure we're going to get to these figures earlier, that these sort of secondary problems, if you want to class Tommy Robinson as a problem, exist at all. Almost none of what gets tarred as far right would exist without the treachery of our elites.
But then you've got the mainstream media, Connor, doubling down on this narrative that it's completely wrong to question mass immigration at all. I want to show you this column from Maya Goodfellow in The Guardian, which has one of those headlines that you would probably think were a spoof if we knew The Guardian wasn't so crazy. It was headlined, "We keep hearing about legitimate concerns over immigration. The truth is, there are none." So we shouldn't even be having this conversation, Connor.
Yeah, I got sent this article and someone said, "Oh, do you want to cover it for Lotus Eaters?" And I just thought, frankly, this is not convincing anyone except their increasingly insane and dwindling readership. The only thing that I would focus on are who gets invited to Parliament and what the MPs themselves are writing in the papers, or their preferred heads of the NGOs. And I say that because Nick Lowles not only hasn't been arrested, Hope Not Hate were invited to Parliament earlier in the week to give a dossier on thought criminals like presumably me, because I have a page now, you, Dan, because GB News is in their State of Hate report. So despite spreading false information that probably led people to be attacked on the basis that they were white by Muslim retaliation gangs, they get invited into the Big Tent Club. And then David Lammy takes to the Times and has the audacity to tell English people, because when they say far right, they mean the English working class who refuse to have their identity dissolved into the multicultural melting pot. He had the temerity to tell English people whose ancestors have been here for millennia that they are the ones that need to assimilate, because actually Britain and England is a nation of values, and those values just happen to be liberalism, multiculturalism, tolerance, and universal love for all mankind, including all of these communities which don't seem to meld with the liberal dream all that much. So notice what the politicians themselves are saying, not just their insane acolytes in The Guardian. Like, what they're trying to do is rob the indigenous English, the host population, of an entitlement to stick up for their history, their heritage, their identity, and their homeland against hordes of invaders who would like to commit crimes against their family and have the audacity to rob them of their pocketbook and live at their expense. I think it's disgraceful.
Well, yeah, and by the way, not just want to commit crimes, have committed crimes, have committed some of the worst atrocities in modern British history, from the Ariana Grande concert to 7/7. It's not as if this is an irrational fear. It's happened. You know, we've seen the consequences of it. But you know, I've only promised to talk to you about products on this show that are actually life-changing. This one is a bit more personal, but the guys watching will completely understand. And let me tell you, girlfriends, wives, if you're looking for a present, a treat for your husband or boyfriend, this is a game changer and they will love it. Because we want our grooming routine to be a one and done deal. So the days of using the same trimmer for your face and your nether regions are over, thanks to our friends at Manscaped. They've come up with the ultimate package to keep your hairs trimmed from 12 till 6. So introducing the brilliantly titled Beard and Balls bundle, featuring the Lawnmower 5.0 and the Beard Hedger. Now, I'm not talking about this type of lawnmower, but the product provides precision trimming for all areas, even the sensitive ones, and you'll get them as manicured as freshly cut grass. I'm talking about a trimmer for the moneymaker, another for the boys downstairs. This trimmer gets it right the first time. It's gentle on the skin, and it has 2 interchangeable skin-safe blade heads, so you can choose between a precise trim or a smooth finish. Did I also mention it's waterproof, which means you can trim in the shower, avoid making a mess. Perfect for those of us who appreciate efficiency. Next, I want to tell you about the Beard Hedger. So whether you're going for a neat stubble or a full-on lumberjack look, this trimmer has you covered. It features a titanium-coated stainless steel T-blade, 20 length options, which means you can achieve any style you want with just a twist of the zoom wheel. And just like the lawnmower, the Beard Hedger is also waterproof, so you can handle your beard grooming right in the sink or shower without worrying about water damage. With up to 60 minutes of runtime and an LED charge indicator, you'll never be caught mid-trim with a dead battery either. This is a gentle product, no more cuts. You'll keep your loved ones happy, and using this product will increase your confidence. The best news is, today, I've got a great deal. 20% off and free shipping. It comes really quickly, actually, because I ordered some products the other day. Very, very quickly delivered, beautifully packaged. You just have to use the code Outspoken at the checkout. You'll get 20% off everything via the website www.manscaped.com. So let me repeat that, www.manscaped.com. Use the code Outspoken at the checkout. No more juggling multiple tools or dealing with subpar results, just efficient, effective grooming wherever you need it for the premium grooming experience. Trust Manscaped. But look, it's really interesting, Harrison, to see what happens too when a true freedom fighter, and there aren't many, ends up in the mainstream media. So this is what happened and how Claire Fox was questioned on Newsnight last night. Have a look and I'll get you to react off the back.
Are you saying that there's from your perspective, libertarian perspective, absolute freedom saying whatever you want to without consequences, even if it incites? First of all,
incitement is a particular and very specific. I'm going to instruct you to go and, I'm telling you to go and burn that mosque down, right? Yeah. That's incitement. That is against the law. Some of the things that people are being, right, to use an example today, because you actually said a 53-year-old woman, the judge actually said, I'm finding this difficult. He's actually sent her to prison for, I think, 18 months. She's a sole carer of a disabled person. She's basically a quiet person who said something really vile.
And so immediately the point was made to Claire Harrison, so anything goes, does it? And there's no acceptance, actually, that you can have a nuanced discussion about free speech, and that we know there's a real difference between what Julie Sweeney said, which was a generalized comment, quite hateful. I'm not actually defending the comment in any way, but it's very different than making a specific threat against a specific religious institution.
It's very, very interesting. Firstly, I should say that I admire Claire Fox's forbearance still appearing on questions on Newsnight. I can barely watch.
Very brave, yes.
I can barely watch it these days, let alone attend, and have to mix with all those, insufferable.
And you never get a fair hearing
in the green room
on that show.
No, I can expect that. Maybe I'll find out one day. But in any case, yes. What's very interesting is when the standards of incitement or the standards for inciting racial hatred are relaxed, and when they're not. I mean, I quoted that example earlier of Baha Mustafa, a Cypriot Turk who was born in London in 2015, saying "kill all white men." That's on social media. 2015 charges were summarily dropped by the Metropolitan Police.
Well, Harrison, what about the BBC itself, who actually broadcast a comedy show? Remember, it was hosted by Frankie Boyle and had a black comedian on who actually said "kill Whitey" as some sort of joke, and it not only was broadcast, there was no outcry, there was no investigation by the off-communists.
Completely. And I also, now that you mentioned the BBC, I remember Joe Brand's comment about someone throwing acid in the face of Nigel Farage. It'd be much less funny if it actually happened. I also remember one of the most contorted New York Times articles I've ever read, where they tried to dissect that song, which is quite popular among African communists, Afrocentrist communists in South Africa. So kill the Boer, kill the Boer, kill the Boer. It's not one of the most subtle songs you'll ever encounter in the world. Yet the New York Times was trying to dissect it line by line and explain how there's actually much more context here. But of course, Rule Britannia, which doesn't contain anything which could possibly be classed as incitement, is all of a sudden really problematic at the proms when it comes to be sung. And so look, under the woke moral order, you need a certain amount of inequality in order to fight equality, and this is what we're seeing in action. And yes, it's very unscrupulous, very unnuanced in terms of standards of free speech. I would want to make three distinctions, I suppose, about free speech. And I think is her name Julie Sweeney? I think her comments would her comments fall into what I would call horrible rage rhetoric. And I don't think that meets the much more exacting standards of incitement, which Claire Fox was trying to lay out on Sky News, which have to be very specific and very direct. As for the incitement and for incitement to violence, I think that should remain part of the law. I would be in favor, if it actually exists, of getting, because I'm not a lawyer, but I would be in favor of getting rid of any laws which are as nebulous as to couch themselves in incitement to racial hatred, which is likely to incite racial hatred. It doesn't even say you have to intend to have incited racial hatred. It just has to be likely. And there's ample...
Because the thing is, Harrison, it's a turn of phrase. Like, again, I'm not actually defending what Julie Sweeney said, but I will defend our right to use turns of phrase. For example, quite often people will say about Westminster, oh, let's just burn the whole place down. They don't actually mean go and burn down the Houses of Parliament, do they? It's a turn of phrase. And I think the problem is this nuance has been taken away, Connor, for very specific purposes.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, I wonder if I'll be slapped in cuffs because I've got Guy Fawkes ominously over my shoulder in my background on my show. This has been a long-standing debate about the borders of incitement to violence ever since Henry II once said, won't someone rid me of this troublesome priest? And then Canterbury Cathedral became incredibly famous. But it's all well and good for us to debate the boundaries of the law. The thing is, with the law, it doesn't matter. As Joseph de Maistre once said of constitutions, constitutions only matter insofar as the people who wrote the documents are still around to uphold their values. If the people who are living under the law don't believe in the fairness of the common law system, if they don't believe in just the fact that the values of a nation are those held by their host population, they can't just be chopped and changed and showered upon someone if they step through Gatwick or Heathrow. The law no longer matters. It's just who is applying the law that matters. And we know all of these judges are usually captured activists. We saw this with how the Supreme Court handled not only the Brexit litigation, but their recent ruling in favour of insane climate activists that ensured that now every time we drill for North Sea oil, you have to take into account hypothetical emissions out into the future, shutting down our ability to be energy independent. The law is a tool of activists. It's no longer a tool of justice. And we should all do well to recognise that.
Totally, because what about all of those eco-terrorists who turned up at the bank with hammers and caused £500,000 worth of criminal damage and were let off by the judge? So again, there's loads of examples of this two-tier policing. But look, I think what's really interesting is that the public are completely out of step, as ever, with the mainstream media on this, as the latest political poll shows. And I know it's very early in the cycle, but given what's going on, I think this is really significant. Labour, slump 6 points. No change for the Conservatives. But look at what's happened to Reform UK. Now the unofficial opposition surging 5 points. And Harrison, that's despite the unhinged criticism trying to blame Nigel Farage for the riots.
It reflects very well on the people of this country that despite the relentless gaslighting, despite the stranglehold in legacy outlets of at least over the dissemination of information and the spread of opinion, they are not universally fooled. And I think this poll attests to that. And so does some of the polling that YouGov did, I believe, in the aftermath of these riots, which have seemed to have died down a little. But I think about a week or so ago, it turns out that people are capable of making distinctions between legitimate grievances and motives for action which are grounded in a certain amount of concern and anger, and the actions themselves. And what we saw when YouGov tried to break down the public reaction to the riots is that among all, and protests, not all of them have been violent, is that a majority, not only of Reform voters, you would expect that 95% of Reform voters thought that mass immigration policy in the last 20 years had to answer for some of the blame, but even a small majority of Labour voters, even a small majority of Lib Dem voters, and around 78% of Conservative voters also thought that mass immigration policy in the last 20 years was partly culpable. But they managed to combine that with when polled with opposition to the riots themselves, and so. The public are wiser than they're given credit for.
But Reform UK have been really strong as well, don't you think, Connor? I mean, they've taken risks here, especially going completely against the narrative, knowing they're going to face criticism. Nigel's obviously pulled back a little bit, but I think he was right to ask questions of the police and of the authorities in the days after the Southport massacre. And by the way, we still don't have the answers to the questions that he asked. But you've also had Richard Tice being incredibly strong on two-tier justice, specifically when it comes to the case of the two guys at Manchester Airport who we saw with our own eyes beat up the police and still haven't been charged with a crime. We've had Rupert Lowe doing some really good work as well. So I actually think Reform UK deserve this surge.
Yeah, I think Reform, and look, ahead of the election, I had some criticisms for them being a bit too soft. I know my colleagues were a bit more incendiary than I was at times, and I have heard that Reform has taken that to heart a little bit. I think Reform are finally fitting the mould of the party that they need to be. And that is the party that represents the interests of the indigenous population who are having their interests and their identity erased in the name of turning the entire UK into some big airport lounge that people can just come and go from. And it's indistinguishable from everywhere else. Actually, we quite like our country. We like the rule of law. We like our little Anglican coffee mornings sometimes. And so I think that Richard Tice coming out and saying, no, we shouldn't denigrate the armed police officers for responding with strength, because for all we know, this chap could have grabbed his gun and he was right to do so, and he should get a medal. Rather than them towing the line, as the Conservatives have done, rendering themselves a non-entity despite having a public leadership election going on, I think they're doing the absolute right thing. I think Farage is doing these addresses and presenting himself as a statesman in waiting, and I think what they need to do is go on the offensive as soon as Parliament comes back. And the only misstep I will say is in saying we need a debate about mass immigration. We need a referendum about it. No. We all know it's awful. We've got the reports that it's an economic detriment. We know who's committing the crimes. What we need now is legislation. Reform should be drafting oven-ready legislation to ensure that they can have parliamentary debates about this and make it so that if Labour shoots this down, it's on Labour and they are alienating their voters, where Reform are in the heartlands, of the Labour heartlands, where Reform is second. That is the strategy to do.
And I did see Ben Habib this morning actually disagreeing with Richard Tice over the idea of a referendum. He agrees with you, Connor. He says we don't need it. The British public have made their mind up already, and including in multiple general elections. Harrison, do you think, though, and look, I know it's a long time away, but do you agree with me that Nigel Farage certainly has a good chance of being Prime Minister come 2029 when you look at this environment and you look at the early polling and you see how well Reform UK did in those Labour seats? I think they came second and well over 90 with only a few weeks of campaigning.
Yes, and I might have my figures slightly wrong here. It was either, I think, in 2/3 of seats which Conservatives lost, Reform had a vote share which, if you added it to the Conservative vote share, it would also have defeated Labour. And so it will also, a lot will also depend. I certainly think it's likely, to answer your question directly, Dan, I think it's likelier than it was around a month ago, because I think public opinion and public sensibilities really are up for grabs in this moment in particular, and I'm sure there will be many other flashpoints over the next 5 years that Reform, electorally at least, can take advantage of. They just need to play their cards right. Try not to fall into certain habits that the Conservatives have indulged in recent years. My main concern with Reform is that in their effort to professionalize, which is very important, you need to be a professional outfit. You need to have a national infrastructure. You need to make sure that you haven't got cranks in the movement who are an optics nightmare. But my real concern is that in their efforts to professionalize, they will end up neutering themselves as a political movement and become something roughly equivalent to the Tories in turquoise, and that's not what we want. And so far, over the last 3 or 4 weeks, I would say that the trend lines have been positive along those criteria.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. But that's why I've been really happy to see them doing the opposite of that, actually, over the past few weeks, despite all of the criticism from the mainstream media. And I hope they see this polling and think it's working. Let's ignore the criticism, because we've got to represent the real people of Britain. Now, I want to move on to this extraordinary row between Douglas Murray, the academic, the author, the Spectator columnist, and Alistair Campbell, the man who led us into war on a dodgy dossier. Now, it all was sparked by this interview that Douglas Murray gave about what had happened in the Southport massacre. So in case you missed it, here's a reminder of what sparked all of this feud.
Tell you, the worst thing for me is it's exactly what I said would happen. And the reason I wrote The Strange Death of Europe, and the reason I banged on about this for years beforehand, was I said it is so obvious what is going to happen.
Yeah.
And it gives me, I was so angry watching it. when it could have been stopped.
Yeah, it
Could have been
sucks to
stopped.
be right about something so bad.
I wanted to be wrong. However, there is a deep, deep distrust among the political class in the UK about the British public. They really don't seem to like them. They really don't seem to like them. They're so eager to attack the general public and cover over for anything.
Now, Alistair Campbell went completely mad over this. He copied in the Metropolitan Police, saying that Douglas Murray should be arrested. He compared him to Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda tweet. Well, overnight, Douglas Murray has responded. Watch.
What is going on in the UK, and do you fear that police are scrutinising your tweets and interviews and things you've written?
Well, all that caused this was the fact that I've used my eyes in recent decades, and I've also used my pen. And I have described what has happened to my country of birth, Great Britain, and the continent of Europe, and indeed the wider developed world, and the challenges that come through illegal and legal mass migration. That's not all migration, but illegal and legal mass migration. Interestingly enough, this interview that seems to have caused this breakdown from Alistair Campbell was one in which I simply said, what I describe in The Strange Death of Europe as happening is indeed what is now happening. And I said this, as many people have noted, not in a spirit of glee, but in one of deep lamentation. I never wanted to be proved right on this, and it gives me absolutely no joy to have been proven right, that the importing of very large numbers of people illegally and legally from very different cultures into a society which totally fails to integrate them will lead to massive problems, including at some point a massive backlash.
He then went on to deliver the most brutal and brilliant takedown of Alistair Campbell I've heard so far.
I'm only responsible for pointing out the facts and the lamentable situation that he got our country into. There's a couple of other things very quickly, Rita. Of course, this man, Campbell, is best known for his lying dossier about WMD in Iraq, which helped bounce Britain and other countries into the Iraq war. So if he had any kind of sense of decency, he would have disappeared from public life a long time ago. He was also, of course, the person who hounded Dr. David Kelly to suicide. And that's one of the really interesting things about Alistair Campbell. He's an unbelievable bully and a hack. And one of the things about him, like most hacks and bullies of his kind, he thinks that he can hide behind, as he always does, the claim that he himself is very mentally fragile. One of the interesting things about that is he can chase people like David Kelly to suicide. But if you criticize Alistair Campbell for his frequent bursts of utter insanity, he says that you are using his mental health against him. He's a totally sick individual on every possible level. I make no apology for pointing out the terrible things that he and his friends did to my country.
Hear, hear. And of course, Alistair Campbell has joined the annoying leftist boards threatening to leave X. He wrote on the platform, of course, like a lot of people, and thinking about leaving Xter, given how truly awful it has become since Toy Town Trumpy Fash Boy Elon Musk took over, staying for now on the grounds you should fight the far right wherever they are, but meanwhile have set up with Blue Sky. So if you're already there, please do follow me. I've got no idea what Blue Sky is, have zero interest in it. But Connor Tomlinson, I did point out earlier that since he posted that X yesterday, he has already made 7 new posts on the platform. So he's not going anywhere, is he? What a victory for Douglas Murray, I think we can both agree.
Right, anytime some leftists said that they're going to leave the platform, Lewis Goodall did it earlier this week. It's like a smack addict itching their arm and saying, don't worry, I've ditched the tourniquet and the spoon, so I'll be absolutely sure not to take any more heroin while they're eyeing up a brick in the corner. Look, Douglas is fantastic. His rhetorical takedowns are excellent. I texted him before he actually went on this Sky News Australia thing, and he unfavorably compared these sort of people to dementors trying to come for his career, and vampire from in their irrelevancy, because they seem to have gone absolutely everything right from foreign policy to immigration policy in the last how many years, his IQ points and his fame. Alistair Campbell, I think the man should be held culpable for being party to the murder of thousands of Iraqis and British servicemen, frankly. And as with things happening in politics these days, I'm proud to say I also ratioed him on X by pointing out that Douglas Murray wrote The Strange Death of Europe because he lamented a civil conflict happening and wanted to stop it. Alistair Campbell lied in the dodgy dossier and encouraged a war to happen, and he's the one that's saying Douglas Murray should be held accountable for inciting violence. Not really washing with the British public, I don't think.
No, indeed. Harrison, what did you make of this row?
Well, I must say we're still waiting on a whole raft of celebrities to leave the United States after Donald Trump. After Donald Trump was elected in 2016, that's a promise they regularly make as well. Not only that they will leave these private platforms, but that they will leave their own countries, such as their horror, until they discover that, in fact, it's actually far more lucrative to work on The View or work on CNN or work on MSNBC and howl and spend all day howling about Donald Trump's calumnies. Yes, I was not impressed by Alistair Campbell's interventions into the debate, and I was very impressed by Douglas Murray's as ever. And it goes back a little bit to what I was saying earlier about no one having a monopoly on truth and no one having a monopoly on misinformation. There are sort of two theories of truth which are kind of conflicting against each other in our society, and I would argue that Alistair Campbell represents a sort of top-down theory of truth. Like, truth exists in this sort of weird, abstract, mosaic realm, and we have these especially qualified members of the nexus of media, cultural, and political elites who just have truth wired into them and implement it in a managerial style onto the population. And therefore, censorship is in fact very compatible with that theory of truth, because there isn't a belief, as there is on the second theory of truth, which I'm much more a subscriber to, and clearly Douglas Murray is as well, and I think Elon Musk is too, that human beings are tricky, and truth emerges from clashes of different perspectives, people comparing notes with one another. And I should say that I'm against the top-down theory of truth in principle, but I'm certainly against the top-down theory of truth if the enforcers are going to be unhinged, terminally dishonest ideologues like Alistair Campbell.
Yes, very good way to put it. Very good way to put it. Such a pleasure to have both of you today. Harrison Pitt, Connor Tomlinson, they are the hosts of Deprogrammed on the New Culture Forum. It was a great pleasure to be a guest with them. Was it last week? Gosh, so much has been going on all the week before. You can find it on the New Culture Forum YouTube page, and I hope to have you both back on Outspoken very soon. Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please do subscribe if you want lots more clips and interviews like that. Plus, if you want to watch our totally uncensored after show, then visit www.outspoken.live.